Hi, welcome to another edition of the MSDW podcast. I'm your host, Jason Gumpert, editor at MSDynamicsWorld.com. Today's topic is digital transformation, what it is, what's the payoff, and how is it more than simply an ERP upgrade. My guest today is Eric Kimberling. He's the author of the report, Everything You Need to Know About Digital Transformation, and the bold subtitle is The End of ERP as We Know It. Eric is the managing director of the consultancy Panorama Consulting. He also is probably known by many people in our audience for writing top 10 ERP rankings, a yearly Clash of the Titans comparison for market leaders, and generally covering the ERP space for many years. So let's begin. Eric, welcome to the podcast.
All right, thanks for having me.
Maybe I thought we could start by learning a little more about Panorama Consulting. We know you're an independent ERP consultancy. You obviously write a good number of reports that are very interesting to read and kind of have very catchy titles oftentimes that really draw people in. But can you tell us a little more about what you do for your clients and maybe what you do on a daily basis?
Sure. So Panorama Consulting is an independent enterprise software consulting firm. So we help our clients select and implement software solutions, which includes everything from Microsoft Dynamics being one of the leaders in the market to other solutions as well. We help them through that evaluation and selection process, as well as managing the implementations for them. We also do quite a bit in the way of organizational change management, business process reengineering as it relates to ERP initiatives. Myself personally, I've been in the ERP consulting space now for about 20 years. As you mentioned, I'm managing partner and the founder of the company. And one of the key things that I do, in addition to helping run the day-to-day delivery of our consulting services, is also as an expert witness. So that's a big part of my focus, is helping clients that are embroiled in a lawsuit. We'll help them with the expert witness side of things as well. So that's a little bit about my background.
Great. And that last aspect of it is really interesting. Maybe we can touch on that in a few minutes. I wanted to start by really talking about the thing that got our attention most recently, which was the new report that deals with this concept of digital transformation and its relationship to ERP and ERP investment. Obviously, it's an area that a lot of people are thinking about. We've done a little of our own research and know that people do consider this concept of digital transformation, a genuine thing. It's not just hype, I would say. I wanted to start by asking, are you seeing interest in the concept of digital transformation? Is it playing a part in the engagements that you do? And maybe how would you define the term?
Sure. Those are all good questions. And I'll be honest, first of all, I'll say that when I first heard the word digital transformation a few years ago, I thought it was one of those industry buzzwords that to me just sounded a little bit dated. I had parents that worked at digital equipment back in the 80s, and I just remember the word digital being kind of an 80s term. So when I first heard it, I thought it was kind of a throwback and something that would kind of pass. But as it caught traction and momentum in the marketplace and people just started kind of adapting to that terminology, I started asking the question, well, what does that really mean? How do we at Panorama define what digital transformation is? And we are seeing a lot of interest in that. And I think it's a good indication that the market is trying to look for alternatives to ERP as we know it, or business as usual within the ERP space, and looking for alternative ways to leverage enterprise technologies to be more successful than the kind of the old school traditional way of addressing enterprise software implementations.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. And I've been thinking about this too, because, you hear a term like that, it does sound like hype, but I think it's just broad enough term that you hear it and you think, okay, it's not necessarily something like, it's more general than maybe a term like, I don't know, big data or virtual reality or something that's kind of a specific technology. So I think people can kind of put onto it whatever they think is going to be relevant for them or their business, and kind of it's more of a blank canvas. Maybe is that fair to say? Do you get different interpretations from different folks you deal with?
Yeah, we do. I mean, you get some people that are, depending on who you're talking to, that they get real caught up in the more technical aspect of what digital transformation is. There's some people that view it as really using cutting edge technologies to run your business versus a more back office focused ERP system. But the way I define it, or the way I like to look at it, is kind of like what you said. It's a blank canvas, and it's really just setting aside, all the hype and the industry buzzwords, and really just looking at your business and trying to figure out, how can I use technology to make my business better? whatever technologies that may entail. It may entail kind of your traditional ERP back office system. It could be CRM. It could be some kind of business intelligence application. It could be something related to Internet of Things. There's a lot of different buzzwords and technologies that could kind of wrap into that. But the key differentiator, I would say, for the way I define digital transformation is just how am I not going to be limited by what technologies I look at, and how can I leverage technology to make my business better, whether it's a single ERP enterprise system or whether it's a multitude of different technologies or some combination or some point in between that spectrum.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you also do work in terms of organizational change management, which doesn't have to mean technology adoption, although I imagine that does play a part, right? Can this term, let's say if it has some resonance with a company, can it be sort of an avenue into that maybe a more important organizational change kind of a discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point, because prior to the advent of the term digital transformation, one of the words that we would use internally at Panorama and with our clients, we would talk about this as more business transformation. And one of our messages there has always been that whether you're talking about an ERP implementation or any kind of technology initiative within your business, you should look at technology as just an enabler of a broader business transformation. So that's kind of the way, we've kind of morphed our usage of the term business transformation and kind of piggybacked on this whole digital transformation trend to really focus on not just the technology aspect of things, but how are we going to address that second word within the phrase, the transformation aspect of it. And there's a lot more to it than just slamming in the technology and getting that implemented. You obviously have the organizational side of it, business process and operational side of it. And arguably those last two non-technology related areas are the most important parts of digital transformation. So I totally agree with you that organizational change management component is a key enabler and something that is required if you want the overall digital transformation to be successful.
One of the interesting things, though, that in looking at your report, was you also had a recommendation to essentially it was like punting on technology if need be. So if the technology decision is too hard, and forgive me if I'm paraphrasing here incorrectly, but focus on the processes that need to be optimized or re-engineered if you can't make a decision on technology right away, and then find technology to fit the results. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah. And it's not so much that, I guess the caveat to that would be, it's not so much that if it's too hard to choose the technology, it's more if you haven't, if you don't have your ducks in a row, I guess is the best way to put it, in terms of your operations and really understanding how you operate now, where your pain points are, what your opportunities for improvement are, and kind of what your overall vision for how you're going to operate going forward. That to me is more important that you get that figured out first, and then figure out, how am I going to overlay technology on top of that. I know there's a lot of industry analysts and consultants in the space that feel otherwise. They feel as though, well, you need the technology to help drive some of those changes within your business. And that's true, when you get down to the granular, detailed micro process level of how you conduct transactions within your day-to-day business operations. But I'm talking more just in terms of, if we're going to go through a real digital transformation, which is more of a leapfrog, quantum leap type of improvement to our business versus just automating what we're already doing, then we really need to sit down and kind of set aside technology and figure out, how is our industry changing? How is it being disrupted? How are our competitors beating us out in certain areas? How could we beat out our competitors? What are the things we need to do to be successful? And define it at kind of a high level what you want those macro processes to be, and then figure out, okay, how can I now overlay technology on top of that? And that's going to help me drive the more micro granular processes that is going to be driven by the technology itself. But a lot of people skip that first step where you're really just defining, what are we trying to be? Are we trying to be a commodity-based business that's competing on price, or are we going to migrate more towards a high value service-based type of industry, and what would those supporting processes look like? And those are big decisions you have to make that, choosing a technology isn't going to help you with. So we see a lot of clients that kind of get caught in proper sequencing of events where they try to implement the technology first, and then they're still trying to figure out what they're trying to be when they grow up, if that makes sense. So that's the way we see it.
I know you've stated that there are industries where it's almost not a choice. You have to move forward right now, given the current climate. Are there any that come to mind that are really either that you're doing a lot of work in, or that are really just desperately in need, where players in that space are just desperately in need of changing quickly so they don't get left behind?
Yeah, I think the biggest ones and maybe the more obvious ones that we see within our client base are industries like retail that's just being completely disrupted by Amazon and other e-commerce players. That's one that's been brewing here for several years or about a decade now. And we're starting to see a lot of clients in that retail space that are still playing catch up. They're still, or just now maybe really feeling the pain of not being competitive or not being effective in competing against people like Amazon. So retail is one area where you're not just talking about leveraging technology to be a little bit more efficient in terms of how they ship goods or how they stock their inventory. You're talking about how are we going to use technology now to completely change how we service our customers and how we sell to our customers, how we deliver to them. Everything's changing within that space. So that's kind of a good, obvious case study for a type of industry that is really going for that quantum leap because they have to. Another example is publishing industry. We've worked with a couple publishing clients here in the last year that are still, kind of the traditional paper book distributor. And they're feeling that pain now where it is catching up to them, where they aren't digitally adapted to digital delivery of their products. And so they're looking to us to help figure out how can we use technology to help drive, some of those massive transformations that they need to go through. And then, those are just two obvious examples. But if you kind of go a step further and just look at your average, ordinary, everyday type of industry like manufacturing, whether it's food and beverage or any kind of industrial product, aerospace and defense, even that space is maybe not being disrupted as much as a retail client or a publishing client. But technology has changed so much and the competition has gotten so fierce, both, here domestically and globally, that they are, feeling a disruption and they are trying to find ways to use technologies to just make them more competitive and grow. And yeah, I think the other kind of macro factor that's affecting digital transformation too is just the fact that the global economy over the last couple of years, the last few years, hasn't really grown that much. So it's not like the pie is really getting much bigger, if at all, for these different companies. So they're trying to grow revenue and profits in kind of a zero-sum game where there's limited demand for their products and services. So they are having to, in that way, too, be a little bit disruptive in terms of finding ways to use technology to take market share away from other competitors. So those are just a few examples there.
Yeah, I mean, if you take an industry like retail, which was the first one you mentioned, are there particular scenarios or areas of those businesses where maybe they have an earlier generation of technology that's not good enough, or it's somehow still in a manual or non-digital sort of posture, where in particular that you could mention that where companies really are trying to catch up?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of a retail client of ours that's not based in the U.S. It's an international company based overseas, and they've got several. It's a chain of several stores, and for their region of the world, they're the largest in their retail vertical in the retail space that they're playing in. And they've just had kind of a traditional bricks and mortar model, and it's worked for them. That the part of the world they're in, Amazon hasn't really caught up as much as it has here in the U.S., but it is starting to, and it's starting to disrupt them in their industry. And it's not just Amazon; it's other e-commerce players. So to use them as an example, it's not that they had really outdated technology necessarily. They actually, have a decent back office ERP system. They've got a fairly sophisticated point of sale system that's part of that ERP system. So for what they've been doing over the last 50 years or so, they've got a decent set of technologies that's fairly modern for their business. The problem is it was built for bricks and mortar. It wasn't. They hadn't really thought through, and they still haven't really gotten to that next level where they're giving people the option to go on their mobile device and order a product and have it shipped and arrive the next day. They've got kind of an online catalog on their website, but they don't have that fully functioning e-commerce capability that so many retailers here in the U.S. have, and we kind of take for granted. So I think that's a good case study or a good example where it's not that the technology is really that dated. I mean, they're not that far behind on the technology itself, but their business model is falling behind, and that's where the kind of the disruption is coming from, and the digital transformation need is really kicking into effect, and that's why they've hired us to go through this process with them.
The other perspective I was thinking of when you're looking when you're mentioning these different industries is the types of businesses in terms of the scale of the businesses. So obviously, you mentioned Amazon as a disruptor, and then there's obviously retailers with everything from, multinational hundreds of stores down to a handful of stores that would probably be relevant or be looking at change. And same for, I would think, manufacturing, especially, or other industries. There's the bigger players and the smaller players. Do you see the scale of the businesses that are thinking about these challenges? Is that changing as well? And at the lower end, are there things that they're doing now that they never would have done, maybe, or never would have considered in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess I would say that, on the lower end of the market, when you look at the smaller guys that are, not the big, huge incumbent industry dominators, they're faced with a situation where they've been nimble, they've been flexible and adaptive, and that's kind of their competitive advantage against the bigger counterparts. So they're looking at ways to, I'd say in some ways that's allowing them to jump onto digital transformation and maybe embrace it a bit more than the normal smaller mid-sized company could or would in the past, just because it does, that whole concept of digital transformation is very supportive of that nimbleness and being disruptive and going after different niches or different changing trends in the industry. I'd say, just from what we've seen, I'd say the bigger companies are probably, just from the clients we work with, are probably a little bit less accepting of the whole concept of digital transformation. It's again, it's a buzzword that the CIOs are all talking about it, even at the big companies. But when it comes down to it, a lot of these companies are just so big on the bigger side of things, where they just, they need that back office system, that traditional ERP system, to kind of automate and standardize and consolidate. So that in a lot of ways, they're looking at their technology initiatives to be something that gives them more scale, that makes them more cost efficient. And they're just looking at it, technology, differently than the smaller guys that are looking at it as an opportunity to take away market share from someone else and be more nimble and flexible. So if I had to make it a little bit oversimplified and just make it a black or white situation, I'd say it's more the small and mid-sized companies that are adapting digital transformation in a lot of ways. And the larger companies are very aware of it, and very sophisticated CIOs at those larger organizations that understand what digital transformation is. But in terms of reality and actuality of what they actually go through, it seems to me, just, from my qualitative, unscientific research and just experience, it seems like the bigger companies aren't as likely to want to go through that broader digital transformation. Plus, they're typically, when you're that big, if you're a multi-billion-dollar, multinational organization, you're going to be a little bit more conservative by nature. That's part of your culture, is you're going to be just slower to change, slower to adapt. And that's not a knock on big companies. It's just kind of a reality of a big established company versus a smaller, more nimble company. And there's advantages to either side. So I think that single ERP model kind of fits the bigger companies better, whereas the digital transformation is, for now anyway, fitting the smaller mid-sized companies a little bit better. I suspect that'll change, here in the next few years, and it'll probably balance out a little bit better. But that's kind of what we're seeing in the early years here of this whole digital transformation concept.
Yeah, and I'd like to maybe take that point and point it toward Microsoft a little bit. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned there that I immediately thought of was a point that Microsoft veteran raised recently when they were looking at sort of what Microsoft's doing with their ERP portfolio, with the change over to Dynamics 365 and sort of the evolution of the products, and the new product, the Project Madeira 365 Financials, which is, again, on the SMB side. But one of the warnings that he kind of put out, this one person in particular put out very clearly to Microsoft, was that he was afraid that they were going to make the SMB product too basic, or too overly simplified. And the point he was making, I think it's similar to what you were saying, it's not that small businesses need simple and simplistic tools. They need tools that are accessible for their scale of business, but they can implement sophisticated capabilities and probably do it faster than, like you said, a big multinational ever could,
right,
just by nature, like you were saying, by nature of their. So I think that's one of the interesting things I'm watching for on the Microsoft side in particular. But I'm interested to get your take. I mean, Microsoft has been changing their ERP posture now and it's really, I guess, they've really turned over that gear now. They are into that new phase. What have you been sort of watching for, and what do you think of it so far?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think it speaks well to Microsoft's ERP strategy overall. I mean, if you look at kind of how Microsoft Dynamics and the suite of products that it's offered its customers, if you look at where it's gotten to now and how it's gotten to the point we're at now is it's done so by offering a variety of different types of system, whether you're talking AX or NAV or Great Plains or whatever the product may be. There's been that ability to take more of a best of breed approach to how you implement technology. And, for a while, I think we went through a phase in the industry where best of breed was considered a bad thing. And, you had to have one single ERP system or else, you're just going to have a mess of silos on your hands. And for some companies, that's true. But for others, they will take that trade-off in the name of having the upside of more flexibility and better functional fit for all the different parts of their business. So I think if you look at this concept of digital transformation, which doesn't always equate to best of breed, but it does kind of point that way for a lot of companies in terms of not being backed into a corner or not forcing in a single ERP system across the entire enterprise. Companies like Microsoft that can provide multiple solutions and have multiple ways to address the different technology needs for different companies are going to be more able to support that whole concept of digital transformation. So I think Microsoft is, in particular, within the industry, first of all, they have a very different strategy than a lot of companies in terms of how they manage these products and deploy them. But secondly, I think that fits this whole digital transformation concept very well. And I think they're well positioned for companies that are looking for more of a digital transformation rather than a more traditional single ERP type of approach.
I mean, I was thinking about what you said earlier in terms of, sort of not buying technology without, if you still have to get your ducks in a row process-wise. And I get the sense that Microsoft does want to make that case to some extent that, if you buy into Office 365, if you buy into Dynamics 365, at least at some small scale, you can find and then you add on top of it with its model of things that are kind of still very early on, but things like, Power BI, which isn't all that new, and then, Power Apps, and which just got released in its first iteration. I get the sense that they're trying to say, come to our platform. You will find all the tools you need to implement those things, even if maybe you don't have them fully defined yet. And that's, to me, a little bit of the lure of it is that they're trying to say there's enough flexibility there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you could take it a step further, what you just said, and look even outside of the realm of kind of traditional enterprise technologies that Microsoft provides. For example, you've got SharePoint. How does SharePoint help automate a company's content management and document workflow and things like that aren't directly related to ERP, but there's a lot of overlap there, and it certainly affects the same people in the organization. And it's another technology that can be used to fully enable that type of digital transformation thinking. Skype for Business being another. I mean, there's just all these different technologies that Microsoft provides, even outside of basic ERP or core ERP that supports that model.
Does that approach sort of hold up when customers are evaluating Microsoft versus its competitors right now, from what you're seeing?
To some degree, I think there's some competitors or some vendors out there that have they have the ability to integrate fairly tightly with SharePoint,
Sure.
For example. Just going with that example. So I think that's the good thing with Microsoft is it is so open, and SharePoint isn't limited to just people using Microsoft Dynamics. It also works with other ERP systems. But I think it does the one thing that Microsoft has an advantage on is just the kind of the user interface that most organizations are comfortable with and used to, just because it looks and feels like Windows and other Microsoft products that they're using in other parts of their business. So I'd say on one hand, yes, because it has that Microsoft look and feel and there's tighter integration. But on the other hand, SharePoint's been pretty open and other vendors have been able to integrate with it as well. So I think it just gets back to that whole digital transformation concept where you're not necessarily stuck choosing one or the other or having to pick and choose. In some cases, companies are choosing Dynamics and then other document management or content management systems. In some cases, they're choosing SharePoint and other non-Microsoft vendors. There's just a lot of options out there for companies, which is good news for most.
Yeah, for buyers, that certainly would be good news. Another area that I was thinking of was analytics and BI capabilities, and I hesitate to sort of put too much of a label on what those purchasable software solutions are nowadays, because they sort of, I don't know, to me anyway, I mean the range of options is so broad and can be defined in so many ways now. When it comes to, like I know from watching Microsoft that some of the machine learning stuff is almost more powerful in my mind than some of the sort of pure sort of dashboarding capabilities in terms of where they might go next with some of the ERPs. But obviously they have that too, and I know other vendors do. Is that intelligence and analytics stuff? Is that front of mind when companies that you work with are looking to go to actually buy a new ERP, or is that? I ask because sometimes I hear, well, we make that a stage 2 or phase 2 decision. We don't try to decide on that at the same time that we're making a buying decision on ERP.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think what you said is true. The last part of what you said is true. I think a lot of companies are. I don't want to say they're dismissing the whole need for business intelligence or analytics because they all recognize that it's important. But I think sometimes these enterprise software decisions can be so overwhelming that it's almost too much to think about, to where they want to focus more on the day-to-day functionality of day-to-day business processes and how am I going to do my production planning? How am I going to take a customer order? How am I going to fulfill it? They're more focused on that than they should be, probably, in terms of maybe focusing more on the more strategic, low-hanging fruit in terms of the BI analytics type of stuff, beyond just the basic dashboards and basic reporting. I mean, all ERP systems have some basic level of dashboards and reporting, but when we talk business intelligence, we're talking about how can we not just have a report, but how can we use data to make better decisions and plan our inventory better and provide better information to our customers and shorten our lead times and improve our available to promise dates for customers, all that stuff. I mean, that's what big data and analytics really does. That's kind of the utopia of what we're trying to get at. But too often, I think companies kind of feel like, well, we don't have any of that stuff now, so let's just go ahead and pick a core ERP system that automates or changes what we do now in the core business, and then we'll figure out how to bolt on later on the BI side of it. I think that's misguided, but that is what happens probably more often than not in the industry. I'd like to see that change, but it's just kind of the reality of what a lot of these companies are doing. But I think the ones that do focus on BI and analytics and really thinking about how we can get creative or be really innovative in terms of how we use data rather than just reporting data, how can we actually use that data to make our business run better and make better decisions? Those companies are, again, going down that digital transformation path. They're thinking more in a more innovative way. And then the companies that are just looking to automate what they're already doing, and that's more of the traditional ERP route it's still appropriate for some companies, but I think it's just a matter of really acknowledging or understanding what it is you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to accomplish that real digital transformation approach, then you want to be looking at things like BI and analytics because that's a key part of it. But if you're just looking to kind of automate what you've already got, refresh your technologies, and plan on doing it again in 10 or 15 years, then maybe you do put that off. It's not a terrible thing to put it off. You are leaving benefits on the table, but for some, that's okay. So I think it's just a matter of understanding what is it you're trying to accomplish. Are you trying to accomplish just a vanilla ERP implementation, or are you trying to do a digital transformation? And then you want to make sure you're making decisions accordingly in terms of how you evaluate stuff like BI and analytics.
Yeah, I mean, I've been seeing more what I would consider fairly advanced analytics getting baked into ERP, like into capabilities where presumably you could use some insight to make a decision, whether it's some kind of a forecast on like demand forecasting, or whether it's a best guess on recommending an add-on, like an upsell or a cross-sell. Do you think customers like to see that? Is that, I mean, I assume it demos well, but is that potentially a good selling point for vendors when they're trying to reach ERP prospects?
Yeah, it is, especially the cross-sell, upsell, getting back to that retail example I was talking about earlier. I mean, for retailers, that is a very important component of how they sell, and seeing something like that and having better data to do that is very important to them. Even for manufacturers, I think it's definitely a very appealing, kind of a sexy technology to be able to show that, here's how my product can help you better forecast demand from your customers, and here's how it can help the finance organization better forecast revenue and expenses and all that stuff, and do budgeting and all that. So it does help. I think the problem is a lot of times companies see that and they think, okay, that's great, that looks really cool, we want to go that route, but then when it comes time to implement, a lot of times they say, well, yeah, that's cool, but it's too much to bite off now. Let's just focus on the back office stuff, which sometimes is okay when you want to phase in the technology. But the problem is a lot of times companies never get to that later phase of actually leveraging the full functionality that's available in areas like analytics or some of these other kind of outlying edge technologies outside the core back office type stuff.
Right, right. Back to digital transformation overall. I mean, you have, or Panorama has actually a boot camp all about digital transformation coming up. Is that right?
Yeah, we've got one coming up here in January. We do them about 3 to 4 times a year at different parts of the U.S.
And what can people expect if they attend that kind of an event?
Sure. So it's meant for companies that are either in the midst of trying to figure out what technology they want to leverage for their organizations, or in many cases, it's companies that have already selected an ERP system. They know which direction they're going to go, and they're just looking for training on how to make their implementations more successful. And it's usually a pretty even split of companies that are kind of going through the evaluation phase and companies that are just about to start on the implementation of whatever technology they've chosen. So this whole digital transformation bootcamp is a 2.5-day training course that's meant for CIOs, project managers, and others that are going to be involved with enterprise software initiatives. It's a technology agnostic training, so it's relevant to whether you're implementing Microsoft Dynamics or some other solution. And it's just a way to give project teams some direction and tools and education in terms of what to expect and how to make the projects more successful in terms of not just evaluating potential systems, but more importantly, figuring out how you're going to implement it and how you're actually going to use technology to enable a digital transformation.
For people who are going to attend an event like that or a training like that, do you find that most people have been through these kinds of projects one or more times before, and they've got sort of battle scars, or people tend to come in as new inductees into the ERP space?
It's usually a mix of both. We every time we've done this, we've had a really good mix of some newbies. Obviously, there's a decent share of people that have never done this before, and that's why they're coming to boot camp. But then we also like that there's a pretty even mix of people that have been through it before, and they understand what they're about to get themselves into, and they're maybe a little bit more nervous than even the person that hasn't been through it yet, because they have those battle wounds to show for it. So they're just looking for, how can I avoid some of those same mistakes? How can I learn even more? Because I know this is a complex initiative that I'm about to go through. So it's good because, the newbies certainly learn from not just us, but from some of their peers that have been through it before. And then obviously the peers that have been through it before learn from each other and from us. So it's just a good way to network and do some peer learning, as well as obviously Panorama and other instructors that are part of the course providing their knowledge as well.
So looking ahead into the rest of this year, into the new year, are there other industry happenings or news that you have your eye on that you think is going to be important in the next few months here?
Well, there's the usual trends that have been ongoing with cloud, and you mentioned a couple other things with BI and analytics. Those are all kind of trends that have been forming and gaining momentum, and those I think will continue. The one that, for me personally, that I'm pretty fascinated by and that I've been watching is just the whole artificial intelligence movement. I know Salesforce.com, for example, and I think Microsoft. You mentioned Microsoft as well, are investing in artificial intelligence capabilities. I'll be really curious to see how that plays out. And you talked about analytics before, and how will artificial intelligence and analytics kind of integrate here to make enterprise software even more powerful and smarter, and make the organizations that are using the technology more smarter and able to predict more accurately what is likely to happen in the future. So that's probably the biggest one, is artificial intelligence, and just really understanding how some of these vendors are going to integrate that into their core offerings.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm excited to watch that one too. There are a lot of areas that really are changing or poised to change pretty significantly in the next couple of years. And one of the most fun things, I guess, that I get to do is see what some of those sort of bleeding edge technology people sort of start imagining now that you're not going to see in anyone's production systems for 2-3 years or more, because those leading things often tend to roll out, but obviously it takes a while. But that's the most fun when people are creating it for the first time, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, great. Well, Eric, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a lot of fun talking to you. Good luck with your next boot camp, and look forward to the next report.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. And let me know if you have other questions going forward, and good luck with the the other podcasts coming up here.
This has been another edition of the MSDW podcast. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to be on the podcast, maybe you're an ISV with a product release, a consultant with a case study, or a VAR with a unique slant on the Dynamics product space, drop us a line. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor. You can reach me, jgumpert at msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.